So I'm going to introduce both of our keynote speakers who will be speaking in turn. It's my pleasure to introduce both of them. I've been a long-time fan of both of them and their amazing work in West Oakland. Catalina Garzón is Program Co-Director of the Pacific Institute's Community Strategies for Sustainability and Justice Program, which partners with community-based groups and coalitions in California to conduct strategic research on environmental health and justice issues. Ms.Garzón has experience in multicultural leadership development, participatory curriculum development, participatory action research, and popular education. She holds a master's degree in city and regional planning from UC Berkeley and is currently working on her doctorate in environmental science, policy, and management at UC Berkeley with a focus on assessing the effectiveness of participatory research partnerships for environmental justice. Catalina is the 2010 recipient of the Thomas Yamashita Prize, which honors young scholar activists whose work serves as a bridge between the academy and community. Next, I'd like to introduce Margaret Gordon, who is an environmental activist who embodies all the characteristics of an effective community leader in West Oakland, where she lives and works. She co-founded the nonprofit West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and always has her ear to the ground on issues impacting her West Oakland community, including residents and truckers. The issue that Margaret is perhaps best known for addressing is the effect of diesel trucks at the Port of Oakland in West Oakland, and the environmental issues related to diesel truck pollution. In 2010, she was awarded the Purpose Award by Civic Ventures to honor social entrepreneurs over 60 who are addressing major social issues. The one social issue that Margaret Gordon has most addressed is the right to breathe clean air and live a healthy life. As Margaret says, if you're not at the table, you'll end up on the menu. Catalina and Margaret, if you'd like to join us up here. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
One of the things the bio didn't say that I am a native of the Bay Area, born in Richmond, raised in Baby Holmes Point, and my parents bought a home in '53 in this area on the other side of the freeway. And one of the things that this place, the community, was first the 280 freeway and then next to Margaret development. So I've been an activist, been engaged in some kind of activism since I was 16 years old. I'm 66 years old. I have 14 grandchildren, and I was a housekeeper up to 15 years ago. And also, I was a student here at San Francisco State when Dr. Howard Carter was the president. So you know, I've seen a lot, heard a lot, smelled a lot, been around a lot, okay? Close to 15 years ago, Pacific Institute, where Catalina works, got a grant to come into West Oakland and teach a core group of residents about indicators. So this is a story about community residents learning how to embrace measuring things, doing data collection, and understanding the power of using research. One of the things I like to know, Professor, she did ask the question, how many people here are working with community organization, community-based organization using community participatory research? All right. How many are interested in learning how to connect with community groups doing community participatory research? I mean, just ain't interested in working in the community. All right, so this is my story. I'm sticking to it. This is my truth, okay? This is my story. This is about the West Oakland Environment Indicators Project. If you see, I talk loud, so I'm just going to use the microphone. Can I put the microphone on? Can y'all hear me? Okay, all right. I'll work the microphone. This is about the story about the West Oakland Environment Indicators Project. This is the Bay Area, and where that big A is West Oakland. West Oakland is a community surrounded by 3 freeways, and we have we are impacted by the Port of Oakland and magnet sources of diesel businesses coming into the area. We're also impacted by the community being the oldest industrial area of the city. A lot of toxic chemicals in the ground. So our mission for the West Oakland Environmental Indicators is about we want to increase environmental justice, public health, air quality, and land use awareness. We want to also make sure that residents learn how to understand about disproportion being exposed. And we want to provide motivation and leadership to the West Oakland residents and inform the neighborhood of advocacy tools and help them set priorities, foster political education, and make research and data available. West Oakland is a community surrounded by, like I said, 3 freeways, and we also have 12 times the rate of youth in our community than Lafayette being have to be treated for asthma. This is where I live at. Where the big trees is, the first big tree, that's my home. That's the same place I've been living for 21 years. And you can see the truck going by, but you can't see on the other side of the street is the post office distribution center. So I have on the average, we have counted, there are 22 to 44,000 truck trips coming through West Oakland every day. The history of West Oakland is that heavy industry pollution from the port have associated activities. At one time, the Cypress Freeway divided the community, and now everybody know about in 1989 earthquake, there was a collapse in the freeway, right? So they had to reroute the freeway. We still lack a grocery store. Our neighborhood starts with resources, and we have chronic unemployment. And when I say chronic unemployment, with a business like the port, we may have up to 27% unemployment at any given time. How we got involved in West Oakland activism is that when we started building the freeway, PG&E workers were digging a trench to do the construction work, and they found fluoride. How many people here know what carbon fluoride is? Can you tell me? Can you speak up?
Oh, it's an organic molecule of chloride.
Yes. Okay. Well, the property that it was digging in for digging the trench in was that over the years we had used to be a junkyard, and also it was a place where they brought in fertilizer. And the fertilizer had something got into the ground and also into the water table. So when they started digging, they hit plume that gave vapors and made the construction workers sick. So in 1999, I began my training with the Pacific Institute and risk factors to public health strategies to mitigate emissions. And in 2004, we founded the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project. 2007, one of the achievements that I became a commissioner for the Port of Oakland. I was the first resident, the first black woman, the first community person in 80 years of the port to ever sit on the commission. I sat there 5 years. Then also, I'm still a member of the U.S. Clean Air Advisory, and like I said already, I won a Purpose Prize, which is $100,000, and I really didn't expect to be that out of 1,400 people. Okay, our method of environmental justice is about reduce, revive, relate, recycle, and reuse, and build relationships. What do we do? We have our environmental justice. We also have our centric circles. All these are circles that we really push up on anybody coming to our communities. Public health, air quality. We also have invested time in learning about climate adaptation and influence, community influence or revitalization. If everybody don't know, communities like Garzon are always under siege for redevelopment. And like somebody said earlier, if you're not part of the plan, sitting at the table part of the plan, you will be on the menu. And now when I say be on the menu, it does not include what you have to invest with your time and see how are your impacts going to be dealt with as far as quality of life. Because most developers, most cities don't even want to participate, don't want you to even talk about those things. Unless you talk about a Title VI civil rights complaint, you get their attention in. Some of them, like I said, our program areas are air quality, indoor and outdoors, and community influence, being involved with, we have a lot of recyclers in our neighborhood, and like I said, redevelopment and climate adaptation. And one of the things we found out about climate adaptation and resiliency, that most traditional NGO groups do not want to talk about how communities can survive through any of those disasters that possibly come from climate change. Extreme heat, fires, floods, extreme cold. And we're not talking about polar bears. I don't have a zoo in my neighborhood, so I can't talk about a polar bear. I can talk about how people can be able to get energy efficiency in their home. I can talk about how the ill disaster, how they're going to get out. So I can talk about those real quality of life things. Our research has always been about community participatory research and hands-on skill development. I'm doing outreach, community with members of organizations, sharing our methodology, doing base building, leadership development, and advocacy. Those are the tools we use. Now, this is, how many people know what this thing is on this up here? This is an air monitor. We're the only community group in Northern California that have our own devices to measure the quality of our air. So it happened, Intel was in Berkeley, and they had a prototype office in Berkeley one time, and somebody called us and wanted to talk to us about how can they bring out this equipment. Because at one time, how many people have cell phones in here? They want to devise a chip that you can hold up, like you said, when you know what the air quality is. So we were able to get this equipment. We have 3 air monitors, dust trackers, and we're doing citizen science to the community and filling that gap of air monitoring that we do not get from the government or from the city. Our community influence and revitalization is that we have worked with the city, regional planners, regulatory, public policymakers, businesses to improve the community. We have participated in something, I said, we developed called the West Oakland Pacific Plan. We have created our own roadmap to identify brownfields with the State Department of Toxic Substance Control. We work to remove industrial recyclers and truck businesses from our neighborhood and put them in a place where they can do their business called the Port of Oakland. We don't want them to go back into another neighborhood to give that impact to that neighborhood. We want them to be as close to where they need to do their business. So, and we have like I said, we have climate change adaptation. And you see all the blue area on this map, this is all the flood zone for West Oakland. This is the predictability of a sea level rise that may happen to this community. And we have a collaborative model. We share the process and the power. Everybody's welcome to the table, as long as I don't be on your menu. And the community, we work with community residents, the city of Oakland, and the port, and local businesses, and our regulatory partners have been, at times, the US EPA, the regional air quality, and the local department we're always working toward a healthier, happier West Oakland. And that's my story.
Thank you, Margaret. I learn something new from Margaret every day, so just want to appreciate you so much because you've taught me so much through the years. So I'm just going to switch PowerPoints here. So again, my name is Catalina Garzón. I'm with the Pacific Institute. That's actually the, thank you. And we're a nonprofit research institute based in Oakland, California. We're right across one of the freeways that rings West Oakland that Margaret was talking about, which has a heavy diesel truck traffic to and from the Port of Oakland. And I just want to share a little more in terms of the history of the research partnership between the Pacific Institute and the West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, just to add to what Margaret mentioned. So our institute is about 25 years old, and in the mid-90s, some of the researchers there started thinking, you know, how can we contribute more to the communities right around the institute? We do a lot of water and climate change and environmental research. And so a few of the researchers there started thinking about how they could really build bridges with community groups in the Bay Area and do more locally focused research. And so the Environmental Indicators Project that Margaret mentioned that Pacific Institute started with a community building initiative in West Oakland was sort of the first kind of research partnership that we had in any community. And so the evolution of our organization as a research institute has really, and as a program of the institute that partners with community-based organizations and coalitions, has really grown from the learning that's happened with our community partners and coalition partners over the last 17, 18 years. So I just wanted to introduce environmental justice and the relationship to community-based participatory research, because this is sort of what guides a lot of the work we're doing, and a lot of this is something we arrived at in the course of our partnerships. It's not something we necessarily figured out ahead of time. So that's one key learning, is just to be really open to challenging yourself and your assumptions of what you've learned in books and school. What you'll learn when you're putting things into practice is often very different, and there's never a standard or cookie-cutter approach to a participatory research partnership. It really is very fluid and evolves over time, and the foundation of it are really relationships and trusting relationships, and those take a lot of time to develop and to mature and to sustain and nurture. So I think that, you know, Margaret and Karen Pierce, who's in the back, who's also part of a regional coalition that we're all a part of, the Ditching Dirty Diesel Collaborative, have watched me grow through the years into the roles I play now, and I'm really indebted to their knowledge and their mentorship for the work that I've been able to do with them. So environmental justice, as folks may or may not know, is really it's really a movement. It's a social movement that was born sort of out of the confluence of the civil rights movement and the environmental movement. And really, it's about thinking through who is most burdened and who benefits most from environmental resources and pollution and their distribution. So it's really looking at this issue of distributive justice and disproportionate impact. So looking at environmental pollution burdens across a certain region or state or even across communities, and thinking about who is disproportionately impacted by pollution and who benefits the most from environmental amenities like parks, clean air, clean water, a lot of the resources that we sometimes take for granted in more affluent communities. And procedural justice is sort of the other thread of environmental justice, which is really about thinking through how decision-making involves the people most affected by the decision, or the issue that the decision-making is addressing. And so this also can be applied to the research process. I think a lot of times the research process is seen a little bit as a mystery, even through educational systems. A lot of times students aren't necessarily taught a lot about what the different research methods are, what the different steps involved are, and so it's sort of not very transparent even to people being taught to be future researchers. And so it's really important, I think a key role that participatory research plays is making that process very transparent and then sharing decision-making power with the community that's most affected by the issue that's being studied. And thinking through how you can design the research process to make it very accessible and engaged with those communities that are directly affected. So, as I mentioned, what's really important in building a trusting relationship, the way that that often gets operationalized in a research partnership of this kind is to really do goal setting together. So develop clear goals for the research partnership or project that you're working on. Strategies or methods. How will you be carrying out this research? Why are you doing the research? What kinds of community organizing or advocacy or leadership development can that research process support? And roles. So what roles will the research partner organization, the community partner organization play? And if capacity building is a goal, which is often the case, then the part of the objective is to challenge even that boundary between the researcher and the community organization, right? So you're trying to build capacity maybe within the organization to carry out their own research. That's sometimes a goal of this process for the community organization. Other times, they're happy to delegate out the research and the number crunching to the research partner and to say, bring it back to us. And as long as you're communicating clearly and sort of make that decision jointly, then that has also been a process that people follow with participatory research. And to really be an ally in interactions with intermediaries and agencies. A lot of times what researchers bring to the table are academic credentials or certain kinds of credibility through formal education, or certain kinds of technical ways of talking about issues that decision makers can give credence to. And so it's important to really be mindful of those power dynamics of, holding those kinds of, or wielding that kind of credibility can kind of be a double-edged sword because you're trying to question this idea that only people with academic credentials can be experts or have expertise in an issue, but sometimes that's a useful thing to waive when you're in a decision-making space. And then also thinking about the implications of your research. So what is this kind of, the research, every piece of research is about a community is a representation of that community, and it's often geared towards an audience outside of the community. So thinking about what kind of work that research is doing in the world. Is it undermining community aspirations in the community or political movements or organizing and advocacy work that community-based organizations are doing? Is it just indifferent? Is it not clear whether or if that research is going to be useful or have a practical application, or is it actually being designed very, very deliberately to have a practical application that improves policy and builds community power, which is a sort of community-based participatory research, is more oriented in that latter space. And so the way we usually try to break down what the research process looks like and key steps or decision points in the process is this kind of a flow chart. We usually create with our partners, and we may tailor it depending on the kinds of research methods that we're using for the partnership. But essentially, one important, very, very important thing that you'll see here that isn't usually something that's in your methodology books is building the working relationship with the community partner and fundraising jointly with that partner to make sure that that organization has the resources that they need and support that they need to play their role in the research project that they want to play. So that's another kind of manifestation of power dynamics, is how much resourcing, how much funding do people receive, and if community partners are resourced for their contributions along with research partners. And so we try to do as much as possible joint fundraising with our partners. And if not, but writing both organizations into the same grant and at least supporting also the fundraising efforts of the community partner organization. So for example, with the Ditching Dirty Diesel Collaborative, which I mentioned earlier, this regional coalition of groups to reduce diesel pollution in the Bay Area that kind of grew out of a confluence of different community-based efforts to address the negative impacts of the movement of goods to and from ports and rail yards and other infrastructure. This collaborative created a sustainability committee. So there's a designated committee of organizations that support the fundraising efforts of the coalition, which go to support the community-based groups, participation that are members of the coalition, as well as the staff of that coalition. And so that's an example of how the structure of a coalition or collaborative effort can really support that key step in the process of providing resources. And then we'll also, of course, do goal setting and project planning, making sure we understand, to what extent does the community-based organization want to be involved in the research process? Do they want community residents to be directly involved in data collection and in analysis? And if so, what kinds of training do those community residents need to really meaningfully be involved in the research process? What kinds of skills might they need to build through the process? What kinds of compensation might they need if they're going to be community researchers working on this project? What kinds of issue-based knowledge might they need to develop through this process if it's a technical issue in order to really maximize their meaningful participation in this process. And then collecting and analyzing data, if it's a participatory research project where community residents are directly involved in data collection, we'll often time the trainings that we do, the skills building trainings with participants, so that they're timed out with the research process steps, so that as we move through the process, the residents are getting that training on the methods, or the why we're going to go out and collect this kind of information in this way, and how we're going to then make sense of this information together, and then generate findings through that joint dialogue or discussion together, and think about how we're going to frame the results of our research and how that strategically can support the organizing or advocacy or leadership development work of the organization. And then evaluation, I think to us it means something a little different. It's just part of the reflection and critical learning process that's embedded in the research partnership. So how can we improve our work together? What can we learn about how we've collaborated through this process that will strengthen our partnership and our future work together? So one of the things that's challenging, I think, about participatory research is how do you put these principles into practice? And, you know, there are a lot of really incredible values that underpin a lot of research partnerships. We want to share decision-making power. We want to share resources. We want to support co-learning, or where each group each person involved is learning from the process and also sharing their background and their skill sets to strengthen the process. And so it's important to think about concrete tools and ways we can operationalize these principles in the structure of partnerships. So, for example, if you value, you want full, participation of the impacted community in the research decision making. One tool we've used often is creating a memorandum of understanding with the community partner at the beginning of the partnership, which really outlines the division of labor. So what the research partner is going to be responsible for, what the community-based organization is going to do, the different steps in the research process, the timeline for those steps, and key decision points and ways of making decisions through the process. So typically we'll convene a project planning team between the research and community partner, and then we'll have this planning team map out all of this content and draft up a document that reflects the discussions and decisions that were made through this dialogue together at the outset of the process. And this is kind of a touchstone document, but it's also a document that can be helpful in accountability and transparency, so that it's clear what the expectations are on both sides and how decisions are made. And principles of collaboration is sort of another version of this that you'll hear that's sort of a little less formal. But it really kind of outlines the goals of the partnership or project and mechanisms for accountability. So how are people going to hold each other to these principles in the way they make decisions and the way they work together throughout the partnership? So what the questions that are on this slide after each step are questions we kind of ask ourselves, but we also often ask within meetings. And I think this kind of tendency to use questions reflects the role of the participatory researcher oftentimes as a facilitator in the process. So really you're kind of facilitating these discussions, these decision points with the community partner organization. And it also reflects this commitment to shared learning. So it's really inspired by, for example, by a popular education style approach deriving from Paulo Freire and other scholars that is really thinking about question posing and the power of questions to draw out people's innate knowledge. So it's really providing, we often provide a framework, but the way we actually talk about that framework is not necessarily through statements, but through questions. And we'll just pose a series of questions in our conversations with the community partner to arrive at this common ground around goals for the project. When we train the participants or residents that will be engaged in the project, oftentimes what we do is we'll develop the workshops or the curriculum for doing skills building around a specific research method with the community partner organization. So for example, with West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project, We developed a Community Leadership Academy. It was a 4-session, 16-hour training that we developed together around the impacts on community health of goods movement, the movement of trucks, diesel trucks and trains to and from ports, rail yards, and other freight transport infrastructure. And we've also developed those kinds of workshops, for example, when we were training residents to do the diesel truck count that Margaret mentioned in West Oakland, to generate an estimate of emissions from diesel trucks and trains there. We actually had some mini training sessions where we would incorporate a lot of learning by doing experience-based learning with the community researchers. So we hired a team of 10 community researchers, and so we would actually go out and look at what kinds of trucks were coming at along the key intersections in West Oakland, and then figure out, where exactly do we want to be doing the truck count in West Oakland, based on their own knowledge about where they've seen a lot of trucks and trains in the neighborhood and where those posed a key problem, or were close to residential areas or other sensitive sites that they wanted to really understand what the impacts of this diesel traffic was having on those areas. So, as I mentioned, popular education is really a thread that runs through a lot of our work in terms of the way we facilitate participatory research partnerships, but also the skills building trainings that we use to engage community residents in the research process. And so I think this is a kind of visual we've used a lot to think about the different building blocks of popular education as an approach. And really it's scaling out from people's individual personal experiences as a really powerful source of knowledge, out to having people in dialogue with each other to generate an analysis of their shared experiences or how they're affected. Similarly by an issue, that this isn't just their own challenge in their life, or it's not just an anecdotal understanding of what's happening, but it's actually part of a broader pattern of experiences in the community. And then we'll guide them through a process of thinking about the root causes of this pattern that's emerging from their lived experiences. Why is this happening in the community? Why is this happening not just in this community, but in other communities? And then use that as a jumping off point to think about solutions. So what can we do, or what can be done about this pattern of experiences that we're observing? And who has the power to give us our solution? So that's often when we'll bring in information about how decisions are made on that particular issue, what kinds of agencies and decision-making bodies are involved in that issue, and have people think through what kind of strategy and solution that they can advance to address the problems that they've identified. And then last but not least, the action phase is really important. So actually putting this shared knowledge that's emerged from this process into practice. And that's usually where we work very closely with a community or coalition partner to figure out how the research and this popular education process can feed into a broader advocacy or organizing campaign around a particular decision-making target. Collecting and analyzing data, I think that this is the heart of what a lot of people think of as participatory research, is having residents directly involved in the process of collecting data. Sometimes that happens less formally because the process is really about drawing out people's experiences as data, so sort of like qualitative, the richness of people's qualitative knowledge about their own lives. And so we've done that through many tools. We've developed with with Margaret's organization and other groups, tools to do participatory mapping and use hand-drawn maps as a way of documenting place-based knowledge in the community that residents have that others outside of the community may not know or understand. And then bringing that together with data that's created by agencies about that community and looking at those representations of, for example, maps that agencies produce versus the map that the communities produce themselves. And so then we'll talk about what are the differences across these maps and what does that tell you? What are the agency maps not capturing that the community knows about this issue and knows to be important, and how can we lift up the community's knowledge and share that with decision makers. So oftentimes we'll use mapping, community mapping, as a process of arriving at information advocacy goals for the community. So what do we know that the agencies and decision makers need to know, and how can we communicate that to them? How can we then kind of critique their own data and understand that, you know, this map isn't just hard fact, but it's actually, it was created by people too that may have limited understanding of the kinds of issues that we're experiencing, and how can we bring that awareness to them. So it creates kind of an empowering sense of ownership over people's knowledge and how it can interface with agency data. And then taking the action phase oftentimes really involves engaging residents in presenting what they know, you know, their own lived experiences, their analysis, but also what they maybe learned from collecting other forms of data in the community, or critically engaging with the data that agencies produce about their community. And so oftentimes we'll do power mapping. I know, I think on the Thursday session at the Institute, you all will be doing a little bit of that. But looking at the landscape of who has decision-making power on this issue, and what kind of power does the community hold in the form of community institutions, coalitions, relationships within the community, relationships with others outside of the community that might carry weight or influence in this decision-making process. And then thinking through who the target audiences are that need to hear the results of the research. And then developing tailored research products for each of those audiences. So what will work for communicating findings to a decision maker may not work, probably won't work for communicating findings to other community residents. So oftentimes we'll produce a research report for decision-making audiences, but then we'll work with the community or coalition partner to produce fact sheets or popular education style activities or games or other forms of communicating that same information to community residents in a way that's more interactive and engages multiple senses, or just more accessible than a research report format would be. And then in terms of evaluation, I already mentioned this earlier, but we do also try to document what the outcomes of the project were, both in terms of process outcomes. So what did people, what did the research partner and the community partner get out of the process? And I really want to emphasize that it's really important to think about outcomes as being in a holistic way. So it's not just, what did the community partner gain, though that's very important, but also what did the research partner, what did you learn? I think it's important to acknowledge that there's a lot that the research partner doesn't necessarily know that they're gaining out of this process, and to recognize that that's integral to having a healthy partnership. And then tracking the use of the different research products by different audiences to figure out what works best to communicate the findings of the process to decision makers versus community members versus other audiences. So just to close, I wanted to say that our research partnerships have really been very iterative, as I mentioned. One project has sort of led to another, and that's why we're still working together after so many years. I think the Indicators project, just to give you just a very concrete example of what I mean. One of the 17, or was it 19 indicators, 17 indicators that we developed and published in the Neighborhood Knowledge for Change report for West Oakland in 2002 was on air quality. And it was based on data that was collected on stationary sources of pollution by the EPA, the Toxic Releases Inventory data, which you may be familiar with, but it's basically self-reported information from polluting facilities that's reported to the EPA. And so in that process, the community committee that was involved in that Indicators project started realizing, actually a lot of the pollution, a lot more than we realized of this pollution is coming from diesel trucks and trains, from mobile sources, not just from stationary sources like factories in the neighborhood. And that's how we started looking into what sources of data were available on that issue, and saw that there was sort of a lack of neighborhood level information available on that issue. So the indicators were based on secondary data analysis, or looking at data that was already collected by agencies and then scaling it down to the neighborhood level. And what we found was that there was not enough data available at a neighborhood level, or even scalable down to that level, on mobile source pollution, which is why we started working on the truck count. So that residents could document and help generate an estimate of emissions that were being produced from diesel trucks and trains. And so from there we started working with other communities that were impacted by this issue to create this diesel collaborative that I mentioned in 2004. And then went on to do a lot of the leadership development work that I mentioned with the Community Leadership Academy, and also kind of translating the research into policy and systems change. So working on the truck rerouting of diesel trucks out of residential neighborhoods in West Oakland, getting a new route established in partnership with truckers and other stakeholders and agencies in the neighborhood. And then from there, the regional coalition, the Diesel Collaborative, started working on regional policy, land use and transportation decision making that would impact how these different communities, whether or not their concerns were being addressed in these decisions being made. And so most recently, that's been sort of the focus of our research, is working with this coalition to look at the impacts of a state policy, SB 375, Senate Bill 375, which has mandated every region in California to develop a plan to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But what we realized was that the policy did not include a requirement to look at emissions from diesel trucks and trains. It only looked at passenger cars and trucks. And so the Diesel Collaborative has been working to integrate public health into that, the way that policy is being implemented here in the Bay Area. And so I just wanted to share that arc of the different kinds of projects that Pacific Institute's been involved with in partnership with West Oakland Environmental Indicators Project and with the Diesel Collaborative, just to share how iterative, how one thing leads to another, just based on how we've learned together about how these processes work. And so when we hit kind of a bit of a dead end trying to get some of community concerns addressed in local decision making, we tried the regional angle, you know. And so it's become a multi-pronged approach where, you know, we're not putting all our eggs in any one basket, but we're still, you know, working on making local land use and transportation decisions accountable to communities that are impacted by diesel pollution. We're also working on that at a regional level. And then there's also a state coalition that started to come together around these issues, connecting regions across California, working on these issues to try to scale up our impact to a state level. And then there's a national network that's also forming of impacted communities and researchers partnering with those communities that's working on trying to get federal policy around freight transport passed that really accounts for community concerns and engages communities that are impacted by this issue in decision making. So I think I guess in a nutshell, it's a very evolving story, and probably maybe every time we tell it, a different version of it kind of comes out. Because we're constantly reflecting and learning about what's happened in the course of our partnership. So it's a really dynamic kind of an experience to have. And so that openness to learning, I think, is the most constant thing that has run through the entire partnership. So I wanted to close there and just thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate you, and especially Margaret and Karen and the organizers of the Institute. Thank you so much.